Okay, so this is the first lecture for our class dealing with a definition, description of what do we mean when we talk about an information system, and I guess specifically a business information system. All right, so a couple definitions here. We've talked about this before. This idea of, the difference between data and information. So data, information is a set of organized related data. Remember, if you recall, data is unstructured, you know, organized collections of measurements or signals or in some form, digital form, to which we apply organization, we apply rules, we apply context, which gives us information. Right? And then knowledge, information is also moves up further to to knowledge, communicated or received concerning a particular fact or circumstance. All right, so we gain insight. So the path we follow is at the lowest level we have data. We convert data to be information, and then through study, communication, research of information, we can gain knowledge. All right, and then system, kind of the high level definition of a system is, a way, a process of organizing and grouping things together. All right, so we call it, an ordered or comprehensive assemblage of facts, principles, doctrines, and the like in a particular field of knowledge or thought. So that's kind of a very formal definition of, what is a system. All right, but it's at a high conceptual level. That's really what a system is. Mm. In particular, what we're interested in, and what we're talking about in our class here, is this idea of information systems as um, implemented and realized through the implementation of technology, which is a big part of business, has been a big part of business, is even more of a big part of business as we move ahead. Just give you some insights here. So, kind of an example of this. Um, this is a chart of um, capital investment organized. It's just kind of a high level chart. Capital information technology capital investment. So capital investment is the acquisition of assets that can be capitalized and amortized over a period of time, which is really from an organization's perspective represents a pretty significant piece of investment within the operation. If we take a look at the total capital investment, we kind of see you know a curve here, a dip in the 2008, 2009, kind of concurrent with the economic downturn, and then kind of a um, resurgence, back following from 10 through 15. If we look at information, so this is total investment. This is information technology investment, and what we see is we see a pretty steady curve, even through the downturn, the big picture downturn. IT investment continues to increase and was, in 99, it was 21% of the capital investment of organizations. 2015 is 37%. So we've seen a steady growth. So this is a pretty big number of your total capital outlay is in information technologies. All right, which I think is makes sense if you're looking how we're leveraging it, how business has changed, and how we use technology in business. Right. So the different ways we can use or have used information systems. So from a business perspective, there's a business application that can assist in any number of business functions. So within advertising, this idea of being able to identify and home in on a target market. In sales, understanding what's happening performance wise, being able to understand high value customers and also recognize low sales customers, low value customers. Um, Human resources, things like detecting absenteeism, purchasing, linking suppliers of different receiving locations, automating that. And then finances, kind of looking for different potential investment opportunities. So all of these, this is obviously this is not the only thing we do in sales, not the only thing we do in purchasing, but an example. There's ranges of functions. So it's not so much that technology is the business, but information technology is the way we execute business. Maybe probably a more fair description. There are, though, companies that have been built purely on information. All right, so we've seen this starting, probably for about the past 25, or as kind of with the rise of the internet, starting in like 91, 92, 93, through today. So we see companies like eBay, which is an auction marketplace, or Amazon, electronic fulfillment. Google, which is actually an interesting organization, because what it is really it innovated by taking search, internet search capabilities, and wiring it up with an advertising platform. All right, so that's where Google makes its money. All right. And then Alibaba, which is a business to business marketplace. All right. So we say, what is an information system? So there's really three things we do. What these tools do. We collect data, we process data, and then we store data. All right. So the collection of data, we generate it. It's generated through execution of business processes. If we have a computer-enabled business process, that the execution of that process will generate data, and that can be collected. All right. The processing of the data is, within kind of as we're doing tasks, as events are occurring. These things can be recorded. These events are recorded, and stored, and then ultimately we can come back and revisit that. We can use it both through the execution of the process, and then also go back to analyze what happened. All right, we spend a 24-hour period doing sales orders, so we're executing the orders, executing orders, executing orders. When that time is up, as we get past that, we want to go back and monitor. Well, what happens? What happened? Was that a good day or a bad day? When can we find anything that would influence these decisions, or influence kind of what happened? All right. So that's kind of the high level of what an information system is. Um, One of the core things in information systems is this idea of what we call IPO, or input processing output. Everything in a computer system application there's three parts to it. One is you have some type of input, which is taken, um, in, could be in digital form, or any number of forms, but usually a digital form, which is then processed, and within that process changes occur. All right, and then once that's completed, uh, we can create output. So IPO has been around as long as we've had computers. It's not necessarily a new thing, but it is still a fundamental building block of how we do information processing. An information system, we can describe it as a set of interrelated components designed to collect, process, store, distribute information. In addition, we have also other features and other functions, that can be built into it, or added onto it, or integrated with, around decision making and coordination and control. So these things have really have the level of sophistication of information systems. If we look at kind of we compare systems from, say, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, to systems today, what we see is really the size and the scope, the complexity of these interrelated processes. Combined, we take these systems that are fueled by, kind of new innovative technology, such as the internet and mobility, which are those have own systems. We put all these things together, and we kind of see what the modern technology landscape looks like. So as we say, this is our kind of the simplest form of an information system. Input it, becomes process it, we process it, we we output it, we then evaluate what the output is and to use that as feedback either into the input or into the processing. So the idea is, there is an expected state. So if we look at what this input process output is, we have an expectation of what is in the, if we do a certain input and we apply certain steps in a process, we should get a specific output. And the question is, that's not an automatic guarantee. So we evaluate it and make a determination. Okay, are there things potentially in the input or the processing which would have affected what the output is, and then can we adjust it at those areas to so we get the expected output. So as we say, kind of like, as a description, input is really gathering, capturing raw data, and can come from all sorts of different sources, internally, externally, digitally, analog, any number of sources. Right? Processing. So processing will convert data into meaningful form. It's the information, data into information, has been part and parcel of computer systems as long as there have been computer systems. All right, so that's what computers do really, really, really well. They'll take data and turn data into information. And then the output is, we take the results of the processing, we transfer it back to use it, and it can be done in any number of ways. So, the early days it was documents and reports. Now these things are digital. So we're kind of seeing a transition from, paper, output in the form of documents to digital. So PDFs. What you do is you'll see PDFs versus pieces of paper. And then finally, the feedback loop, which is the information that you need to evaluate and to make changes for the input or the processing. The core components of an information system: hardware, which is any type of the digital components or the electronic components that make it so. Examples are the central processing unit, a printer, a keyboard, a server. Anything that's got a uh, you know physical configuration. All right, and then combine that with software, which is collections of instructions that enable us to do a particular task. All right, so there's a whole bunch of software things we're familiar with, like Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office, Google Chrome, varieties, and those are just some simple examples of systems. And then we have data. Individual is the data, which is what we process. The question I always ask is, of these three components, what's the most important, right? And the answer is whichever one is not there. All right. Think of this as like a three-legged stool. All right. So we need hardware and we need software and we need data. All right. Hardware without software is a doorstop. Software without hardware is a pile of paper. And then data is, if I can have hardware and software, but if I don't have any data, it's not going to, your computer, your system doesn't do a heck of a lot. A couple terms we use as we talk about information systems, and we'll be talking about this quite a bit. This idea of a process. All right, so process is defined as set of steps to accomplish a particular task based on routines. So there's a specific sequence of steps that needs to be followed. With the expectation is, if we follow these steps, we will achieve a particular we will get an outcome. Consists of routines, procedures. So these are like rules, procedures, practices, to cover virtually any situation. So what will happen is, so a sales processing in an organization, which we will call, and we'll be talking about this later on in the term, we call order to cash, which is basically the sequence we follow from a customer entering an order into a system through the whole execution, the identifying what the product is, um, generating, setting up the logistics for shipping, uh, setting up an invoice, collecting payment, the physical distribution and delivery of that product to the customer. Right. That is set up through, every organization has a set of steps specifically designed to handle these. How do we do this? And how do we handle one-offs? How do we handle returns or consignment goods? Or every organization will have a little bit of a different flavor. All right, but it's that organization's rules. That's what it follows. And then the people, or as we call them, the stakeholders, right? People who use the system, um, which the organization itself. There's the people who who utilize the system internally. There's the system in modern times, customers, who are the people who use the system externally, and then we have the people who keep the system running. All right, so we have designers and programmers and things of that, and keep the operations working. All right, so these are all the different. All these together kind of make up this whole ecosystem. Talk a little bit about this idea of data, information, knowledge. We describe it as a pyramid. At the lowest level, we have data, collection of raw facts, no context. We take that data, we then apply, when we analyze it, we apply rules, we apply context, which then turns those raw facts into information. And the idea is, as we go from data to information, we're adding value as we go. All right. A process is, and I talked about it, it's a logically related series of tasks to get an outcome. And then knowledge is the further process. Knowledge is what we get by further processing of information. So we get awareness. We analyze a set of information and gain insight. Ask questions. Look for patterns. Look for relationships. Look for So these are all the things. By processing information, we can extract or we can synthesize knowledge from information. All right, so here's an example of what we would say, this is data. So this is an example of, actually it's an Access database actually, specifically. But this is a collection of data in a table in a database. So we see we have things like the subject, we have the course number, the section number, I guess the CRN, I guess that's the overall number, the name of the student, ID, student ID, the college they're in, their major, and what year they're in. Right. We can do things like we can break this up. Name could be broken up into first name, last name, middle initial. Or we could put an address in here. So it's really, and as we talk about databases, there's a whole art around this to create these structures so we can get that. So within a database, that we can ask questions and get them back. So we'll be talking about this much more in depth, in a little more down the road. So a question we could ask, a question when looking at that data would be, who are all the marketing majors? And then as a further drill down, who are the marketing majors who are also juniors, right? And we can go against that data. We can write a query which will go against that data and identify, extract out from that full set of information of data here, specifically, the name, the major, and the class. Anybody who is a marketing major who's also a junior. So as we see this data versus information, kind of this whole transformation process, the information system is the thing that handles this transformation process. All right, it doesn't happen on its own. So the information system will define the rules and will make decisions and do evaluations and do all sorts of fun stuff to be able to take a collection of bits and turn them into something we can read and use in our decision making. So as we talk about this whole what an information system does, it takes data and turns it into information. With this transformation process, All right. And what is the transformation process? Well, it depends on what the data is, and it depends on the context of your, what you're trying to do, what the application is designed to do. So in sales processing, data is translating a collection of data into a sales order for a particular product or set of products from a customer who's paying in a particular way. All right. So this is very the specifics of what the information system does is very context driven. It's very specific to that a particular situation. So we have varieties, and information systems and programs can be infinitely variable depending upon whatever circumstances we're dealing with. So strategic business objectives of information systems. So what's happened is, and this has been an evolution I've seen over, it's over the span of my career, of kind of, the role of information technology in a business. What used to be in business school, we used to have at LaSalle, would be undergraduate business majors would take one computer programming class. And that was kind of your flavor of, computers. All right. And, if we look at what we do now, that the way we approach that class is really different. There's a much greater business context associated with, we're not just learning how to do a programming language, but we're actually kind of understanding how we use computing within business processes. All right, so we've seen this growing interdependence between the ability to use information systems and really how to realize corporate strategies and how do you get to goals. How does the organization, you know, achieve what it needs to achieve, what's identified as its objectives. So, the companies, we see this investment, and what will happen is different organizations will have different levels of investment in information systems. Some organizations have, they'll have something, but not necessarily a strategic view, versus other organizations where literally it is their, you know, uh, central nervous system. It runs the entire organization. So, the things we have, some of the different ways, the reasons, justifications for using an information system is there's the six strategic, objectives. One is first is try to achieve operational excellence, enable us to focus on the development of new product services, business models, um, the ability to create intimacy with our key stakeholders, which are the customer, the people on the one side of our supply chain, and then the suppliers, who are the people on the other side of the supply chain, being able to link ourselves to them and achieve, intercommunication, improving decision making. Remember the whole idea of the job of a manager is to make decisions, and in order for a manager to make a decision, he or she needs the best possible information. So improved decision making and informed decision making is better than uninformed decision making. It doesn't guarantee a result, but you want to be as informed as you can. An idea of competitive advantage. So competitive advantage is a concept in business where an organization will look to differentiate itself in the marketplace. It has been the holy grail for like the last 35 years in the business world. Competitive advantage is what we have sought and seek to maintain and sustain, because that really is the thing that it can be leveraged to give you best advantage against other players in the market. It used to be at one point information technology uh, could be used or was being used to kind of really to do a competitive advantage. What's happening now, though, is you need a computer, you need information technology and the systems and the support they provide in order to just survive. You're not going to, it's going to be very difficult to build a business, without in the modern world without an infrastructure capable of supporting your business. We talked about operational intelligence. It's the idea of, you know, you want to improve your operations. All right. So what will happen is technology is a means. One thing technology does a good job of, if you use it properly, is being able to collect information and or collect data get information and provide insights of what's happening. All right. And it can be used for in any number of ways. One is to provide insight around making decisions. It can also be used as a means to interconnect with suppliers, people who are in what we call our supply chain, and with customers. All right, so we've got a whole. This thing has become, especially with the advent of the internet. I mean, I think the internet was a huge inflection point in terms of technology. So that took it kind of took the technology from a something that was just inside of an organization to something where you could actually reach out and directly interconnect with your customers. It's changed a lot. Being able to do new product services. So how do you how do how do and part of this is also how do you compete in the business? How do you find new ways of being able to sell yourself, be able to provide new interconnections. One interesting thing, we'll kind of touch on this. Google, a couple of years ago, about 15 years ago, developed an operating system for phones called Android. All right, so what it is, it's a version. They took a version of Unix or Linux, which is an open source database, which means you can use the software without having to pay a license for it. And what they did is they developed an operating system that could power a smartphone, and it really became the kind of the parallel. It was like the number two. You have Amazon. You had Apple, leading the way with the iPhone, and then um, you had Google releasing Android, as an alternative or a competitor. So you'll see organizations um, like Samsung is really using Android as their mobile operating system. Now the question is, how much money does Google make on um, Android? And the answer is, well, they give it away. All right, so they give it basically license it. Uh, it's license free uh, to companies. So why would they do that? Well, it turns out that the way Google makes money is through access to their site. Right? So the idea is what you'll have is people go to Google, use the Google search engine, and then what will happen is depending upon what they search for, um, Google takes that, combines it with on the results set with advertisements, targeted advertisements, which get sent back to people. So from their perspective, anything they can do to increase the number of potential connections into the Google system is a good thing. So giving away, a phone operating system that is wired that will drive more traffic to their particular search engine is a good thing. Right? So it was always interesting because it was at first glance you say, well, why are they giving it away? Then as you understand the business model more, you get a better sense of what they were thinking about. Um, Intimacy, as we talked about the intimacy, you know, what you want to do is you want to link yourself to your customer as best you can, doing things digitally. So stores reward program is a pretty common way of doing things like that, tracking your engagement with your customer. You're going through websites, you have the ability to do. If it's your customers coming to a website, you can actually track what they are looking at and kind of their behavior on the website, and then try to use that information to help guide or influence your customer decision making. Uh, Suppliers, what you want to do is you want to reduce the friction between yourself and the folks who are supplying um, your I guess your materials, raw materials for your processing. One of the things, if you go back into business, if you look at kind of the way we used to run business, you would go out, companies would go out and they would buy, raw materials and they would store it in a warehouse. All right, and you would have an inventory of raw material. Now the problem is the inventory of raw materials is a cost. All right, by buying that stuff and maintaining it, you are maintaining an inventory of it. So that is, the cost associated with that. You would like to look. Organizations are looking for opportunities to reduce that, reducing cost. So the idea, if you can um, connect to your suppliers in such a fashion so that you don't have to maintain a large inventory in warehouses, and rather keep that at a you ordering when you need it and not necessarily stockpiling, is a thing. So we've seen a lot of integration, backward integration from suppliers or from organizations back to their suppliers to be able to automate this. Improve decision making. Ultimately, it's it's not a guessing game. It shouldn't be a guessing game. It's a making decisions is uh, there's no absolute guarantee because there's a lot of variables. But getting as much information around different factors in in an organization, is make good well, increases the possibility of making good decisions. All right. So one of the things you have is, one of the things you're looking for is making a good decision so you don't either overproduce something or underproduce it. Right. So it was actually there was an analysis done. I think it was Chrysler, where they made a mistake in there. They did a missed estimation of the demand for green cars, and they went out and they actually did overtime to create green cars because they thought they were going to, the analysis they had done said there was a big demand for them. There was not a big demand for them, so there was a lot of green cars sitting in dealers parking lots. Right. So they're trying to get as much inaccurate information as possible. All right. So the idea of you know speed comes into this. It used to be, you know, in organizations, they would know where they were at on a monthly basis. All right. So what would happen is you'd have a month. You would kind of start off your month. You would Activities would occur over the course of the month. Through sales and returns and shipments, and then at the end of the month you would close the books. All right, and then organizations were used to were running at one point on a month to month basis. Now what we know what's happening now is the information we're coming in is getting closer to being real time. Right, we can get a real insight of what is happening. How many orders are coming in per day, and is there a variability within that? All right, so we can a lot more precision. Now, the challenge you run into though when you operate that way is there's no room for error. So obviously, if you're doing this thing on a 30-day cycle, yeah, you got some slack in there. But if you're doing things with as the closer and closer you get to real time, um, if something changes unexpectedly, the ability to respond, your window of response becomes much smaller. So it's a challenge for organizations as we're kind of working with this. And a competitive advantage as we talk about the ability to you know position yourself in the market, make yourself different, make yourself you know differentiate yourself, um, in a sustainable way against other customers. All right, and once upon a time, information technology was potentially seen as a way of getting a competitive edge. Can still be used as a competitive advantage, but it's actually less. It's becoming more of a necessity. So we're kind of moving from a competitive advantage. You're going to be ways in which you can leverage IT to give you a competitive advantage, but in a lot of ways, it's basically what you need to stay in the game. All right, and things change. So, for example, um, in I think it was 1969, Citibank introduced ATMs, automated teller machines. Right? We see that now. Once upon a time, that didn't exist. All right? And so when Citibank came in with it, this was a game changer for them. Problem is, over the longer term, that was not necessarily a sustainable That was not a sustainable differentiator. Everybody else had one. Now, if you open a bank, you have to have an ATM. If you don't have an ATM, then you're not going to be, you know, particularly well received bank. And other things around where we can leverage it. Government regulations. There's things you have to do. You have to record, and you have to report on, depending upon what business you're in. And having that is not having that is unacceptable. All right. So things like the example we show here, Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a reporting process, that was written, which was developed through legislation requiring organizations that the CEO and the executives running the organizations, sign off on the on the results, and being able to and having show that and make it auditable and make it traceable. So the different dimensions of information systems. So we have organizations, we have management, and we have technology. So the dimensions, in an organization, any organization, you have really your top level, your senior executive level decision makers, people who set the direction, set the vision of what the organization is, establish and defines the goals. And then you have the middle managers, which were the people who ran specific departments, and they had the responsibility of implementing the top management's policies. And then we have knowledge workers, which are people who work with data, actually execute tasks and processes, who are using data. So actually the data utilization kind of sits in these two areas right here. People who are what we call the knowledge workers, primarily involved with the acquisition, analysis, and manipulation of information, and then data workers, people who are executing tasks. As they are executing tasks, they are either generating data as we go through, or managing, storing, analyzing data as part of their activities. And then we have the production and service workers who are doing stuff. So there's the hierarchy in an organization is, once again, it's like a pyramid. So you start off, at the top. If you go top down, you have executive to middle management, knowledge workers, and data workers, and then production. As we say, as we show here. So obviously each level is not quite to scale, because obviously there are far fewer managers than there are operational and middle managers. So what organizations, the way companies are structured, usually they are organized by different business functions. All right, so they'll have a sales and marketing organization, and you'll have a human resources organization, and you'll have a finance and accounting organization. Now, one of the things that's happened, and we'll be talking about this over the course of the term, is the way information technology has influenced this. So it used to be, before there was heavy utilization of computers in business, because we've had organizations around, all through the 19th century into to the majority of the 20th century, without necessarily being, information system dominant. That is a relatively recent phenomenon, really kind of from the, late 80s into the 90s, and, to today. All right. And a lot of what was done was businesses were organized, the structure of the organization. You were focused on things like span of control. And really what a lot of business innovation and, competitive advantage focus was on, how do you structure your organization the best way? All right. So you saw was kind of a siloed organization, where you had a sale. Each organization was structured in such a way so each organization optimized its own functions. So you had a sales and marketing group that focused only on sales and marketing, and actually had computer applications that just let them help them do sales and marketing only. Same with HR, the same with finance. All right. So what we saw though is kind of an evolution. Part of what we talk about in this course is kind of what made up this evolution, kind of where this and how things changed. All right. The other thing we have within an information system is the support of unique business processes. Part of what, when we talk about this restructuring of businesses, is really the rise of the business processes being important. All right. We've always had a business process, all right, but it wasn't necessarily something that was at the forefront of uh, business management and management theory and strategy. It really kind of came into its own in the mid 90s, is where it really kind of came up with this concept of reorganizing, re-engineering organizations. And so we'll be talking more about that as we go through, and then obviously the culture of the organization, which are the soft things, the things you don't necessarily see but are very, very, very real, as well as organizational politics. So these are all the different things that are happening. Information systems, have impact on business processes, the execution of business processes, probably not so much on the softer stuff. Right? But we'll be exploring that. Um, so some things about the organization's use of a hierarchical structure, um, accountability and authority, were different groups, kind of a top down. Um, the idea of a big focus on efficiency. You want to be as efficient as possible. All right, so you want to be able to you want to focus on things like lower cost, fewer steps. Things. You want to be as efficient as you can, and then you also want to be able to define, execute to a series of your business processes. And then obviously your organization, politics, culture, environments, and other structures. We are humans, as we interact in tribes and our collective, the interactions between people, different drivers, different motivations, not over and above what is the stated goals, strategic goals of the organization. So we talk about organizational politics. I had one time, just back years ago, somebody told me, our organization is unique because we don't have any organizational politics. So, and my observation from that, my takeaway from that was that if somebody tells you there are no organizational politics, that means there's lots of organizational politics. Right? So the idea is, you want to it will always be there. The thing is, you don't want it to become a detriment. So you don't want to have struggle, competition, conflict that take focus away. It'll be there, but it needs to be harnessed and contained and directed. And because a lot of times what will happen is we want to put changes by putting organizational changes in. The barrier, one of the big barriers for changes, kind of the heart of change management, is this idea of the organization's politics and being able to cope and deal with that. The culture. So the culture is a kind of our kind of what binds the organization, the norms that the organization is together, set of assumptions, as you say, about what the goal and the products are. What should we make? Where should we do it? How the product should be procured? How the organization is structured. How is so there's elements of it that kind of tie back into politics. And as we say here, it can be a very powerful unifying force, but it can also be a constraint. All right, understanding what the culture is. But change management, the issues we run into in change management is understanding that this thing exists, because it's not written down. Organizational culture and politics are not written down on pieces of paper. It's not on an organization chart, but it is very real, and it needs to be understood and needs to be managed effectively. So the relationships between information technology and organizations, it's a symbiotic relationship. They influence on each other. All right, it's some of the things we say: structure, business processes, politics, culture, environment. Um, Another piece on that is also I would also include risk management. The way you implement information technology to some degree is kind of influenced by the position of how risky do you want to be. How much risk is an organization willing to um, take on versus what are the potential outcomes of it. All right, so that's so there's a whole kind of, it's not one dominating the other, but it is kind of a interchange. Each one influences the other in specific ways. The dimensions, so managers set the organizational strategy based upon what the challenges are. Right? And the expectation is that you can adaptability, and being able to um, deal with unforeseen circumstances or be able to evolve things along. So there's a whole range of things that are really involved with information technology, and there's particularly the capabilities that information systems these days can bring to bear. Is actually something else that needs to be brought into the equation as we're figuring out what are how an organization should use this stuff. So the basics of the basic dimensions of it, obviously the hardware and the software and the data. So hardware, software, data, which is those three components. In addition, we have networking and telecommunications. So this is really it's been around. All right, it's been around. The rise of the internet, though, is where it has made this really kind of shifted things around. So it used to be, there was telecommunications and the ability to, for computers to talk to each other, back, on some on one basis. But the internet really kind of gave this idea of universal connectivity. And now we have billions upon billions of devices that are all, connected together over this common World Wide Web infrastructure. Right. So all of this stuff together, the hardware, software, the data management, networking, is what we call IT infrastructure. All right. So this is the term we'll use for this is a platform in which we build this stuff on. All right. So this is the plumbing, the foundation, which kind of runs on its own, but it also becomes the enabler to leverage information systems in a business. The business perspective on this, information system should be an instrument for creating value. What's the value add? We'll use the terminology that's used about as value add. And the idea is if you make an investment in information technology, hopefully will result in superior returns in productivity, in revenue, and long-term strategic positioning. However, we'll put this in, we'll make sure we point this out. It's not a guarantee, all right? And quite frankly, there's elements of risks associated with the implementation of information technology. We'll talk about some of the scenarios where this comes up, where not only do you not get superior returns, quite frankly, you can spend like $500 million, and when the smoke clears, you have absolutely nothing to show for it. So those are not good situations, and we'll talk about those because sometimes those are fun to talk about, so long as it's not your job. So said, do not guarantee good returns. All right, there's variability in this, so you can get it. Now, the thing that's interesting is you get different results for different organizations with the exact same technology. And so it's as much the organization's ability to adopt it and leverage it as it is anything inherently with the technology itself. So you want to adopt the right model, the right business model, and you want to invest in what are the right complementary assets. So this whole, there should be an expectation if you invest in information systems, it means that things are, it's not simply injecting technology into existing stuff, is that you're going to create new stuff. You're going to create new processes and new organizations and new structures to be able to leverage this stuff to best possible advantage. And we'll talk about kind of how we got to this point. All right. So that's kind of what an introduction of where we're, kind of what we're at and what we'll be talking about over the course of the term.